the divine to the human. But, I asked, why do you call it an allegory? Is it not a record of the real facts of God's dealings with man? Why, certainly not, he replied. That were impossible. But why impossible? I persisted. Simply because there is no possible basis for such real facts. Where is your Egypt and Palestine and Jerusalem and Babylon in real life? Where is your Dead Sea and Mount Sinai and Rome and Athens? And he gave me a look of pitying triumph. Where? I retorted, somewhat confused by his confident air, bluffed, as we say in America. Why, they are where they have always been, of course. Egypt is in Africa, Palestine is in Asia. Rome is in Italy and Athens is in Greece. What's the matter with you anyhow, been eating prunes? So, my brother, with a commiserating leer, do you cover one impossibility with another? Where then is your Africa, Asia, Italy, and Greece? Where are they? I replied, still further confused by his domineering insistence. Why, they are where they have always been too, of course. Well, my brother, you ask me to teach you, and yet you appear to know far more than I do. I have been through every province of the country and have circumnavigated its coast and have failed to find these places or anything answering to them. Why, man, I exclaimed in amazement, they are not in the Iron Republic, but on the other side of the world. I tell you I have been all through and all around it, said he contemptuously, and I repeat they do not exist. What? I asked, being now convinced that the man was daft. Do you mean to say, that there is no world beyond the confines of this Iron Republic? I mean to say that this is the world, and if there is any other it has never been discovered. Why, my friend, I exclaimed, your own histories must record the fact that this country was settled by colonists from England as late as the 16th century. Lies, said he, snapping his fingers contemptuously. Scholastic lies to deceive the credulous and make foundation for evil practices. The children of the truth know better. Now see here, I said, warming up and getting interested in spite of the whole thing, you have literature, hundreds of books, histories, philosophies, poems that were written in other countries. How then can you deny their existence? Lies all, he replied, waving his hands scornfully as if to brush them out of the way. All lies, my brother. You have had ships and men come here from America during your lifetime. There are men here now that were born in that country. All lies, he reiterated. Cunningly devised fables to deceive the unwary, but the children of the truth know better. The devil. I'm from America myself. Lies, all thunderation. I cried, seizing him by the collar and yanking him out of the seat. Do you mean to call me a lie? Help! Help! He shouted lustily, the man is crazy. You are crazy yourself, you infernal old loon. I shouted, shaking him all over the seats. Friends! Fellow men! Save me from the clutches of this maniac, he appealed to the other passengers. Come and take this damned old lunatic off my hands. I shouted, still holding on to him. And so as we surged back and forth and other passengers began climbing over seats to get to us, a gong sounded, and a moment later the car ran down on the siding at Aegea and the doors flew open. We must have been 1,500 feet above the earth, and from that high altitude had a most magnificent view. Mountains could be seen in the blue distance, and rivers winding through sunny fields with here and there a lake that flashed like silver. Many towns and villages were visible from where we floated high up in midair. Trains of cars, far below us, looked like great, black, jointed worms crawling swiftly along the earth, and the crispness of the rarefied atmosphere would have chilled us but for the exercise of driving the great double aeroplane. It was exhilarating to the highest degree as we swung around in great ascending circles or hurtled quivering down through the air in long toboggan slides, to leap up again as though sprung from a catapult, when the steering fan was dipped. Helen Morris never looked more beautiful than as we swung side by side under the aeroplane and surveyed the panorama of the earth below. During the year of our acquaintance, I had made no more progress in loving or love-making than on the first day we met. Always kind, sympathetic, sometimes almost tender, she nevertheless held me at a worshipful distance, never repulsing, but always repressing me in a way that convinced me that my suit was not disagreeable, but hopeless. No slighting reference had been made to Professor Hallam since the clay when in her impetuous argument with her father she sneered at the fiddlers of Ironia, and indeed, her conduct afterwards indicated repentance for her hasty and unjust words, for in her subsequent manner towards him in my presence she seemed desirous to make atonement by being especially kind. She was interested in me, that I was sure of, and when I achieved some notoriety by winning the somewhat famous Gangplow case against the state, and began to be talked about as the brilliant attorney from America, her elation was so sincere and apparent as to give me the hope that I had won 2 suits at the same time, but when I would have improved the occasion to press my claim for her heart and hand, she protested, declaring with tears that I gave her great pain and begged me to desist. Notwithstanding, she seemed to be happier with me than with Professor Hallam, and I reached the conclusion after close observation that her hand had been promised to him and she was too proud or too true to draw back when she found that her heart could not be given with it. I had yielded to my fate, and while improving every opportunity to bask in her presence, I no more spoke of my love. But this glorious afternoon I found it hard to repress the promptings of my heart. She looked so happy and all nature seemed so glad, that I could not bring myself to feel that I was a finally rejected lover. The novelty and delight of my position made me again to doubt the reality of it all, and looking into her eyes that beamed as tender as the blue sky above us, I said, "This must be heaven materialized and modernized." "If so, then a good many features were eliminated in the process," replied my fair companion. "I care not what is lacking so long as that feature which makes it heaven be here," I said, looking straight into her deep brown eyes. "And pray what is that?" she asked. "The angelic. But for the testimony of the good book which records that he was cast out." "I would be tempted to retort that Lucifer is also in evidence," she replied, blushing and laughing. "His was a sad fate," said I, "but not so sad as mine, for he was shut out forever from the sight of the bliss which he had lost, while I, alas, must endure the double grief of losing what is more than heaven to me and then seeing another enjoy what I have lost." She blushed deeply and dropped her eyes before my ardent gaze, and then turning her head looked away towards the blue hills that broke the northern horizon. "After all," she said, and speaking, as much to herself as to me, "after all, the Christian philosophy teaches that the real heaven and true, the peace which is above all earthly passion, is as much the fruit of sacrifice as of love." And turning her eyes full upon me, perverse and impulsive as I am sometimes, I yet believe that I am capable of suffering rather than that I should be the willful cause of suffering in another. I began vehemently to protest against any philosophy that would make 2 people miserable for the chance of making one happy, when my ear caught the sound of a wavering melody above us, which seemed to come down from heaven itself. Hark! What is that sweet sound? My companion listened a moment and then her face clouded. "Don't you know? That is Professor Hallam and his Aeolian harp following us. Let's dip," and jerking the steering fan with all her force, we flew down an aerial incline 500 feet or more with such velocity as almost to take my breath. In making these dips or downward glides, only a slight inclination is necessary to send the aeroplane whizzing through the air with the speed of an arrow, but my companion, either with reckless abandon or by accident, threw our machine down almost to an angle of 45 degrees, and when, at the bottom of the incline, the head was thrown up to make it leap into the air again, the great aeroplane bellied upward with a strain that made the frame bend and quiver, and then with a report like the crack of a pistol it burst almost from end to end, and seeming to shudder for a moment, began to drop towards the earth. In this moment of deadly peril, I believe that all that was best and noblest in me asserted itself, and like a flash it occurred to me that the rent canvas, while not sufficient to bear up to, would probably drop gently enough with one to avoid fatal consequences. With the thought came the resolve, and in less than a second after the aeroplane began to fall I had thrown loose the strap that bound me to my seat, and rising upon the pedal leaned over until my lips almost touched the blanched face of the woman I loved, and shouted, for the whipping of the rent canvas made a noise like that of a hurricane. "It is death for one, and I love you and can die for you. Then let it be death for both," she cried, letting go of the bar and throwing both arms around my neck with a vice-like grip, "for I love you and cannot live without you. One kiss, oh my darling," pressing my lips to hers with a thrill that made me to forget the peril of death, and then throwing myself forward, dropped from the pedal. But the fair arms about my neck were strong, and though I struggled to break loose, knowing that the velocity at which we were falling meant certain death for both of us, they held me fast. Down, down we fell with a quivering, fluttering motion like a winged bird dropping to earth, and choked to blindness and suffocation I was expecting to feel the impact that would crush us against the ground, when I became dimly conscious of a fierce shrieking sound above us, and then our downward motion seemed to be arrested. A moment later, we struck the earth with a shock that seemed to break every bone in my body. With a great wave of thankfulness, I realized that we were saved, and disengaging the fair arms, that still wound around my neck like bands of steel, I struggled to my feet, and hastily unbuckling the strap that bound the beautiful form of my heart's idol to the wrecked machine, dragged her fainting from under the aeroplane. My first concern was to ascertain if she were killed or injured, and laying her gently on the grass, I found to my unspeakable joy that she was alive and bore no marks of injury. Loosing the close-fitting bodice at the throat that she might breathe more freely, and fanning her vigorously with my handkerchief, I was rewarded in a few moments by seeing her open her eyes and look up at me with an expression of inexpressible tenderness. "Oh my love," she said, holding up her hands to me. "Then you would indeed have died for me. 1,000 times." I cried rapturously, seizing her hands and covering them with kisses. "Now you shall be mine forever and ever." "No, no, it cannot be," she exclaimed hastily, withdrawing her hands and springing to her feet. "What does this mean?" running back to the aeroplane with an expression of terror. I followed her and saw with astonishment that another aeroplane was foul with ours and lay upon it. "What indeed?" I cried, seizing the end of it and lifting it up. "Oh, can't you see that it is Professor Hallam's? Don't you see his harp? Oh my God!" and with a shuddering cry of horror she covered her face with her hands and fell upon her knees moaning and crying. Then it dawned upon me that the noble man had swooped down and, attaching his machine to ours, had thrown himself to death to save our lives. Leaving the weeping woman, I ran to a group of people who had gathered some little distance away and were talking and gesticulating wildly, and there, crushed and dead, lay the noblest man and greatest genius that ever lived. In his godlike nobility of soul, he had caught our aeroplane several hundred feet above the earth, and seeing that it could not sustain all and prevent us from being crushed against the earth, he had thrown himself down to a horrible death that his affianced might escape with his rival. I wonder not that at last, when earthly passion had been chilled by the cold touch of death and the dross of mortality scarce intervened, that it was of him she thought, that it was the wondrous melody of his nocturne that she heard above the roaring of the frozen sea, rolling down from the beyond ere she passed. And I felt no pang of jealousy. If, in the house of many mansions, where there is no marrying and giving in marriage, but all are as the angels of God in love and purity, I may be accounted worthy of the humblest station in their sphere, I shall be content.